and we're going to get started on today's session. So, welcome everyone to our third module of part of our mentorship program. So, for those of you who have joined us before, you know that as part of the mentorship program, we have curated and designed 4 key workshops, light 60-minute workshops, to equip you with the tools to navigate these unconscious biases that you may face in the workplace. We looked at owning your career. We looked at how do you then mitigate gender bias. And today we're going to be focusing on networking. How do I then expand the networks that help me advance in my career? So I think there are a couple of new names that I might not recognize. So I thought I'll do a quick introduction. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Angel. I am one of the directors as part of Include Consulting. Include is the partner that YS has partnered with to deliver the mentorship program for you. So my background has been across talent development, recruitment, and coaching. So I used to lead the talent development team at WeWork out here in Asia when we launched and scaled. I am also a LinkedIn top voice for gender equality and company cultures. We're going to be using LinkedIn a little bit in today's session, so I'd love to show you what that looks like. And I'm also an ICF certified coach. So as we dive into today's session, I would love to know in the chat, or feel free to come off mute and share, what are some words that come to mind when you think of networking? Anything at all, no right or wrong, but I'd love to know. Come off mute, put in the chat. What are some initial words that come to mind when you think of networking? We have relationships. Yeah. What does everyone else think? Bridge, knowledge sharing, opening doors, diversity. That's a great one. And ideas, exchanging information. Agnes says growth. That's a big one too. Anyone else? Information, ideas, opening doors, people, leveraging. Absolutely. And you're all absolutely right. Christine is saying partnerships. Maria is saying solidarity. And that's very interesting. Now, when we first start talking about networking, oftentimes we may all have different definitions of what that like. What is that like? So I want to take a minute to define that for all of us. Now, when we think of network, we think of a set of relationships that help us get things done, to help us get ahead in our career and to develop professionally. So it's not just about who you know, but also at the same time, who knows you is very much critical to performance and advancement. And with that, what from research, what we also know is there's different types of networks, and the first time I learned about this concept, it was such an aha moment for me myself too. So the first type of networks are the operational networks. So these are relationships with people at work that allow you to get today's work done. So for instance, if you are trying to onboard a new vendor into one of your key programs, making sure that all the procurement element, all the operations, all the paperwork, the relationships that you would need to help push that across the line, get all the operational front done and ready, are your operational network that you rely on at work. The second type of networks are personal networks. So these are relationships with people that we informally hang out with. So for example, for myself, these could be friends that I know from high school that I see on a weekly basis for dinner. These could be other moms of kids that my son goes to play dates with. These are very personal relationships with me. And the third type of networks that we want to focus on is strategic networks. And these are specific relationships that help us work towards our goals, help us broaden our impact, and help us access resources we need. So these would be things like sponsors who advocate for our work, people in our networks who connect us across different industries, people in our networks who sit in different parts of the organization who help us get more visibility for our work. They're very strategic. Now, before we go on to the next part, I'd love to know in the chat, when you look at your current network, where do most of your networks currently fall into? The operational, the personal, or strategic networks? Let me know in the chat or put in the come off mute. Are you more heavier on the operational, personal, or strategic networks? Sylvia saying operational. Vanessa saying personal networks. What about everyone else? Personal, yeah. Personal, operational, yeah. And oftentimes when I ask the audience this question, about 99% of the time, we find ourselves in the operational and personal buckets. And what I want to start shifting towards is us focusing on strategic networks. Because when we think about career advancement, when we think about broader impact, just having an operational and personal networks don't necessarily get us closer to where we need to be. And this is where we want to start shifting our mindset to look at strategic networks that's going to help us, our teams, and YSNCG as an organization itself. Now, what does then a strategic network look like? So the first element is we know that strategic networks are broad. So the network itself consists of very diverse individuals we can collaborate with. For example, if I am a scientist and I'm sitting in the agricultural team, having networks across the sales, might have business development, having networks across marketing, having networks with some of the key universities, key research arms, key publications. You see how that network is very diverse, it's very broad that way. The second element of our strategic network, it's it being connective. So what often this means is the network links us and connects us to people that we might not otherwise be connected to, right? For example, if I am a scientist in the agricultural team, my network allows me to meet people that who are not in my immediate circle, people who might not be other scientists, people who might not work in CG themselves, but offers me that multiple layer of diversity into being connected to people that I might not have immediate access to. And the third element is it being dynamic. So the network is something that's going to evolve with us. It's going to grow with us. So for example, if I'm currently now early in my careers, what I look for in my network in terms of supporting me would be very different to me being a senior leader with 15 years of experience as a director, right? And that's where we see where over the years, as we navigate our careers, our strategic network also equally evolves and it grows with us. Any questions on this so far? I'm just going to pause for a second. You can put it in the chat. You can come off mute. You can also send it to me privately and I can read out your question anonymously so we can all brainstorm it together. Any questions on this so far? No? All right. Now, what we also know is when it comes to networks and networking, there are a couple of unique challenges that women face. Fun fact, from research, we know that actually women are a lot more social than men. But when it comes to networking, women actually network much lesser than men. So we wanted to go deeper and understand why could this be so? So I'm going to highlight two key challenges. The first one is something called the likes attract. Now, as human beings, we all know that we naturally gravitate towards people who are like us, who are similar to us. They may come from similar universities, education, similar nationality, racial backgrounds, similar interests, right? And so when it comes to networking, when it comes to sponsoring talent, we tend to end up networking with people who are like us. We tend to seek help from people who are like us. Now, what happens is women then have to work much harder to find common ground with key stakeholders that we want to have in our strategic networks, that we want to build networks with. And very often, these key stakeholders, these leaders, traditionally might be men around the table. Now, we're doing a lot of that work to shift that, to create that gender equality. But what we know the reality is for most organizations, predominantly is men. So we have to work even harder to not just navigate through that difference of backgrounds, hierarchies, but also another added lens of difference being gender. So we know that can be a little bit more challenging. The second challenge that we often find is the challenge of separate spheres. And many of you might resonate with this, where when we look at the networks of people, the people that we hang out with, we socialize with, who are in our networks when we're at work, is often very different to the people that we might hang out with after work, outside of work. So, say for example, when I come to work, my peers, my colleagues, my teammates that I do great work with, that I work on projects with, are very different to the social circles of people I hang out with when I need to organize play dates for my kids, when I need to perhaps take my mom to social events so she stays active. And what we know is a lot of times this gets heightened even more so when women take on additional caregiving responsibilities, raising children, taking care of family, taking care of the household. And all of this then creates that challenge. Now, at the same time, when we compare the research to men's networks, what we see is a lot of time there's a lot of overlap for men's networks where the people that they might hang out with at work, or oftentimes there is an overlap of whom they might play golf with, they might get drinks with, or who they might hang out with outside of work, which then makes it easier and saves time because it's an overlap of people that you're seeing at work and outside of work. Versus for women, we are having to manage two separate spheres to keep afloat, to keep it going. So it's a lot more time consuming to manage these two separate networks when it comes to networking. Can anyone which one stands out for you more? Curious to hear that likes attract or the challenge of the separate spheres. Which one resonates for you, or you could say even both? Anyone? Okay, I've got a couple of people privately messaging me saying that the separate spheres, time is such a big essence. I find myself struggling on the time piece. Separate spheres is coming up quite a bit. Someone is saying, yep, I unconsciously gravitate towards people that it's more easier. And that's absolutely true, right? The research backs this up. I've personally experienced this time and time again. And when I speak to a lot of women who are trying to also navigate that networking, we often face those same challenges. So, what I want to do today is give you some practical strategies on how to then do it in a way that's going to be more effective. Sylvia saying, likes attract. As I'm now an empty nester, the separate spheres are becoming less. And that's absolutely true. We might find that, as we go through different stages of life, we find different challenges or we're able to commit more time to different things. Thanks very much, Sylvia, for sharing that. So, I want to give you simple, practical strategies that you can start trying in your day to day. And there's three key things we want to look at. One is connecting on a broader spectrum. The second thing is really focusing down. And thirdly, prioritizing and continuing to prioritize certain relationships. So let's first look at connecting. And whenever I start talking about networking, there's always initial thoughts that come to mind when we think of connecting. So a common one is, you know what? Networking is so inauthentic and political. It feels icky. It's not who I am. It doesn't sit well with me. And what we know is how we want to think about it is my network helps me get things done and brings more value to my team instead of just thinking of it as it's icky. Another one that we want to look at is if I just focus on doing a great job, then I'm going to get noticed and going to get promoted. Now, what we know is oftentimes as women, if we hold on to those traditional beliefs that as long as I do great work, as long as I keep my head down, that should be more than enough, we know that's not sufficient enough. Especially as we get more and more senior, it's not just about who we know. It's also equally important on who knows of our work, who has visibility of our work, are the right decision makers who's going to determine our advancement and the impact seeing our work. And this is where we know that it's too naive to think of just doing a good job as being more than enough. The third reframing I want to highlight is, we may think networking is awful. It's about wearing a suit, getting a glass of wine, and walking around a meeting room and exchanging business cards. But today I want to start reframing networking. We can think of it as a win-win solution. It's not just about connecting people, but I get to connect them with others that I can broaden impact with. I get to connect them with different ideas and different opportunities. So you can see how the impact I get with networking is far greater than many different things. Now, why are we spending so much time, especially when it comes to connecting? from research, we looked at the difference between successful networking between men and women. And what we know is when we look at networks of successful men, all they had to do was, as long as they were delivering results and as long as they were central in their networks, they were very successful in getting advancement and visibility. But when we looked at networks of successful women, there was actually a secret sauce that women needed. Specifically, what we knew is when we look at networks of women, they needed a secret sauce of inner circle of other women. And the key to these cliques was the fact that each woman in the inner circle had a set of contacts that were very much independent and separate of each other. So they served as that bridge, right? Earlier we saw some of the words that came up. They served as a bridge to other diverse connections. Now I'll show you how this gets illustrated. Some of you may be across a very recent and famous study that was published in the HBR article recently, and it focused on grape growers in Champagne, France, where amongst the group of growers, the female growers were the minority. And what the researchers found was female growers were actually able to charge systemically much higher prices than male growers for the same quality of the grapes. And when we dug deeper, we're like, oh, that's very interesting. So we dug deeper to understand the research behind it. And what we found was the women who often, the female growers had often closely interacted with one another for social support. And what that meant is through these informal relationships, they were exchanging very useful information and market knowledge that often men tend to keep as a secret, or that they were not just things that they were willing to share. Now, because of those conversations, those information included who does business with what kind of pricing models, to what extent, and because of that, they were able to significantly outperform the competition and charge prices and quality of products that were higher than the other groups. So you can see how having that inner circle of women is so important. A quick poll. Women who had a female-dominated inner circle landed leadership positions that were how many times higher in pay than those who did not have that same support? A, 1.5 times higher, B, 2 times higher, or C, 2.5 times higher? Let me know in the chat, A, B, or C. What comes up for you? I'll just give another 1-2 seconds so everyone can participate. We've got a mix of A's and B's and C's. So the correct answer is actually B, 2 times higher. And that's quite substantial because they have access to information, they're sharing information, they're learning from one another. So how can you then start connecting? How can you broaden that network? So at first it can sound a little bit overwhelming, right? Thinking about how do I connect? Who do I connect? So I want to start encouraging you to start thinking of it with what are some of my lowest hanging fruits? What can I start with? Things that I probably have easier access to. So you can start with asking your manager, your team manager, even your mentors, part of the random coffees and ERGs, and thinking about who can make connections to people that you need to have in your strategic networks, people who need to have more visibility of your work. With the YS ERG, that's a great opportunity for you to build that inner circle of women. Another opportunity that many of you know of is random coffees. So with random coffees, you're able to have access to multiple networking opportunities that's available to all of you. And you can meet different colleagues every 2 weeks. So you're very quickly connecting and broadening yourself to many different people. Don't forget, you also have LinkedIn. So if you go to CG's LinkedIn page, by clicking on the People tab, you get access to everybody who you can connect with at CGIAR. And you can easily put in keywords to narrow down people. So say, for example, I might be looking to connect with people within food security. When I click on people and I search food security, it gives me relevant people who are currently within food security at CG that might be possible connections that I can have. So you can see how very quickly you can expand your network and connect with relevant people before drilling it down. I'm going to pause here for a second before we move on to the next step. Any questions so far? No? Okay. Now, the second thing that we want to do, that now that we've broadened and we connected with different people, is we want to start focusing down. Now, when we first look at, let me see. So when we start first looking at building our network, we want to first always start thinking about reviewing it, reflecting where we currently are, and what we need to do to prioritize and deprioritize. And we want to also approach it from an angle of not just what does my network give to me, but what can we give to our network? So the first thing you want to start looking is conducting that network review. Who isn't in my network today that needs to be in my network? How can I ensure that I'm investing in these weak ties? How do I nurture and make sure that I'm being connected to them, that I'm spending time to get to know them, and thinking of ways that I can get value from them? And then lastly, you would then want to focus more on the people who are value adding, people who are going to be value adding to that strategic network of getting you more visibility within your career and advancement and broader impact that way. The second part of focusing down is really looking at, Okay, the second part of focusing down is, now that I understand who needs to be in my strategic network, how can I best think about adding value to my network? And this is how we think about how can we intentionally add value. So, for example, this could be sharing a certain report that's very useful to them. So not only are they helping you, but you can proactively think of ways to add value to them. Perhaps are there certain research arms, are there certain people that you can equally connect them to for them to also get value? I'll give you my own personal example. Through having a strategic network, I have added more senior leaders within the diversity and inclusion space, which is the field that I specialize in. And when I know that someone in my network is, say, looking to develop their career in diversity and inclusion, I can connect them with 2 or 3 of my key clients who have similarly made a career pivot. And so this way, I know that I'm not just helping one party, but I'm also adding value to both parties that way. For example, another example I could give you is, for example, someone might be looking to publish a report or research in a certain journal, and I might know someone in my network who has had similar experience. I can connect the both of them so that they can connect and share best practices, share tips, and this way I'm adding value to both of them that way also. Just going to quickly look in the chat. I think there might be a question. Someone's asking, so how would you do that when we work mostly virtually? So 80% of the networking I do is 100% virtual. So think about the tips that we looked earlier. When you can use Wires, you can use random coffees, and you definitely want to be using LinkedIn. So through those platforms, you can, one, broaden your connection, and then identify who are people that needs to be your strategic networks. Communicate with them. This could be virtual coffees. This could be looking at, are there any online virtual seminars that you can volunteer them for? Is there a recommendation on their LinkedIn profile that you can add for them to add value to them? Are there certain people even on other LinkedIn platforms that you can connect with? So everything on that networking piece are things that we can do digitally, because we want to stamp away from thinking of it as in, I can only do it in from a, sorry, I think someone's not on mute. I might need you to mute yourself because I hear a lot of echo. Okay, thank you. What was I saying? You can do it digitally also. Okay. I've got a direct message and someone's asking, does Wires provide assistance with improving LinkedIn profiles? So I don't know that for sure. I can definitely check, and I can get Michelle to see whether there's an opportunity that Wires can explore, or whether there's any existing tools that you can already leverage. But LinkedIn is a powerful tool also on within the networking and connection piece. And we can see later, if we have a little bit of time, I can show you how you can navigate that LinkedIn piece of things also. And the last part is prioritizing, right? Now, it's very important that we focus and prioritize our efforts on those elements that benefits us the most and gives us the biggest, as you can say, bang for our buck, because we have very little time, right? With all the different caregiving responsibilities, with everything that's going on in our careers, in our lives, we want to also be maximizing the time that we have. We want to get sure that we focus our efforts on what is our key priorities at this point that helps us get to our outcomes, that helps us get to our goals. And this is where we want to prioritize quality over quantity. A smaller network of people, impactful people, is far greater than having people from all walks of life, from all walks of different backgrounds. So a great way to do that is to make sure that you're doing your network review and looking at who needs to be here, where should I be prioritizing, and what are my clear goals going to be. The second thing I often tell participants is you have to find a way that works for you. For some people, we prefer networking in person. We prefer going to an in-person session in a group setting and networking. For some of us, like for myself, I'm a big fan of LinkedIn networking. I find it most effective. I know of a couple of teammates when they do networking, instead of emails, they like to do videos. So they might do a quick video of themselves introducing themselves and they send it over emails. I know for some other of my friends and teammates where they might find actually going through a connection is much warmer and easier for them. And there are so many different ways for us to get to our goal. There are so many different ways to network. And I urge you and encourage you to take the time to find out what's going to work for you, what's going to work best for you. The second part of it is you want to plan. So when you have these network connections, so say for example, you meet someone on random coffees, or you've asked someone for 15 minutes of their time on LinkedIn. And this is something we're asking of them, right? They're giving this to us freely. So you want to make sure that you're taking the time to also prepare for the meeting. Through the meeting, you want to have a clear ask. So for example, there has been so many times where I avail 15 minutes of my time in a very busy day and I go out to help someone out, to network someone out. But oftentimes they have a lot of questions, but there is no clear ask on what I can do for them. Do you want me to connect you with someone from my industry? Do you want me to advocate for you to be part of a panel? Would you like specific career advice for a certain project that you're working on? Would you want some advice on how you can gain a sponsor? So you want to, yes, prepare for the meeting, but you also want to have one very clear ask that you want the other person's help on. And when we do that, we come to the table prepared. We show that we're respectful of their time that they're locating for it, but also we're showing that we're very serious about this ask. I've thought about this, and this is how you can specifically help me. Okay. And you also want to practice an opening and closing line with your ask. So instead of, perhaps you might have 3 or 4 key questions that you want to get out of the conversation, how you want to close it with your ask, but also thinking about how do you want to introduce yourself? What are some research that you can do about them that you can bring into the conversation? Perhaps there is a recent panel or a recent podcast that you heard about the work that they were doing. Or if you can't find anything at all, perhaps just showing that, hey, I did notice that you spent some time in Rome, and then now currently you're in Nigeria. How's that experience been for you? Just doing that prep and coming to that table, practicing how you want to start that conversation, one helps. At least for myself, I've seen that it greatly helps me in my confidence in showing up for someone else, but it shows that this is something that I'm taking seriously. I'm committed to making the most of our time together. All right. Any questions on this so far? No? All right. So we're going to have time. I'm going to do a summary and then I'm going to show you a little bit of how you can navigate LinkedIn. So in summary, we want to start thinking of networks as in networks and not networking. So through my networks, how can I increase my impact? How can I broaden my impact for myself, for my team, and for CG? The second one is we want to think of different types of networks, but specifically focusing down on strategic networks that gets us to our career vision, that gets us to where we want to go. And the last part is thinking about how we can then build that strategic networks by connecting, focusing, and prioritizing. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing screen. I'm going to look at LinkedIn, but I'm curious to hear what are some of your key questions? What are some reflections that come up for you? Anyone at all? It's a little bit quiet today, hey? Everything? Okay. I'm going to show you quickly what are some tools that we can use on LinkedIn. If you can let me know that you can see my screen with a thumbs up, that would be great. Perfect. Thank you so much. All right. So couple of key things. One is how can we quickly expand our network with people from CG? So a simple way is you can put in the word CGIAR up on your toolbar and you'll see CG come up. And what you want to do is you want to click on the word people. And it shows you everyone that you might possibly know. And this is where you want to put in certain parameters. So for example, I might say I want to connect with other scientists. And perhaps I want them specifically living in Kenya. And it specifically draws out people who might be most relevant for me. Perhaps in another, and then I can try different ways. Perhaps I want to connect with people who are currently based in France and people who are currently looking at agriculture. Let's try agriculture. So with these parameters, there are 7 key people that LinkedIn reckons that you should connect with. And these are some simple ways you can do it. So when you connect with people, you want to make sure that you're always adding a note. So you personalize your request as you send it to them also. Now, the more people you are connected with, how the LinkedIn algorithm works is it then gives you access to more people that you can potentially see. So for many of us, we might be treating LinkedIn like Facebook. If I don't know them, I'm not going to accept them. But regardless whether you accept someone or not, they see the exact same information as even if they're not connected to you. So you have more benefits to gain if you're already connected to them. So step 1, when we think about connecting, the first thing that you need to do is expand your profile, expand your network on LinkedIn. And that's a LinkedIn tool that you can use. So go through CG, go through your previous, maybe even schools, previous organizations that you worked with, and start adding people that you might know. This way, when you search things that you want to look for, LinkedIn then shows you more people who are going to be relevant. Okay? I'm going to pause there for a second. Any questions? We have a bit of time, so I'm happy to workshop LinkedIn questions. I'm happy to workshop some of the challenges that you faced. Anything at all? Let me look at the chat. So Sylvia is saying one of the key insights is being more strategic in developing networks. One reflection is that we need to build this into a monthly or weekly routine, being more intentional about networks. Yep. When beneficial, it is something that needs to be our load, so it needs to be planned. Another takeaway is the 3 key differences. I think it has to do with a lot of our personality. Sometimes it's easy to create the bond. Sometimes I must work more on this and identify the benefits. Absolutely. And the reality of it is we need networks to get visibility for our work, right? And when what we also want to do is find a way that this integrates with our daily work to work. So oftentimes as women, and I see this with a lot of my teammates, especially who are women, we look at networking that is something that is separate from our day to day. So we think of networking that I have to do in my lunchtime, or it's something that I have to do after work or before work, right? but it is very integral to the impact that we have at work. So instead of seeing networking as something that I do outside of work, you want to start looking at it as something that I do as part of my job. So think of, are there coffee catch-ups that you can do as part of your day role? People that you can speak to increase the impact of the work that your team and yourself are doing. So when I first started networking, I used to, again, plan it outside my day job. And what I did notice was a lot of my male teammates, they saw networking as an integral part of their day role. So they would do it as a weekly cadence. They would make sure that they're meeting 2 or 3 people just as part of networking conversations. So that mindset shift would help us greatly by thinking, oh, I need to create additional time for it, but rather looking at how we can use it in our key way as well. So I've got a couple of anonymous questions. Let's look at that. So someone is asking, how can I strategically use my personal network to achieve a career move? Is it possible? Now, if you remember, when we look at personal networks are people that we go to school with, people our kids hang out with. And those are not the people who might have full influence over our work. Those are not the people who are going to make decisions about who gets promoted, who gets sponsorship, what kind of projects that we get allocated. So if we only depend on our personal networks, yes, it helps us on the personal front, but it does not help us gain advancement, visibility, or impact for our work, because it's very different people in those networks that's going to help us gain visibility. I hope that helps. Any other questions? I'm saying when introducing people to other people, you help building other networks too. And this way we can all help each other. Absolutely. And what I often find is, the more we give, the more we receive. When I connect people, they are also looking at ways that they can find ways to add value back to me. They may introduce me to different other people. They may look at opportunities or projects that would really benefit my skill sets. They would say my names in rooms that I don't have access to for projects to get stretch assignments and such. So you see how by us helping each other, it benefits not just ourselves, our teams, but also the wider society for us all. All right. Okay. If there's no other questions, I'm happy to give you 10 more minutes back. I'm going to stay on for just another minute for anyone else who has any questions. But in the spirit of expanding our LinkedIn networks quickly, I want all of us to drop in our LinkedIn profile in the chat so that we can quickly connect with everyone who's on this call, expand our network, and connect broadly. So I'm going to do that, and I will highly encourage everyone else to also put that. Olga's asking, will this presentation be available online? Yep, a recording will be shared to you after as well. If not, thank you everyone for joining today's session, and I look forward to seeing you on our last session on owning the Roman executive presence. See you soon.